There's Lee. Good morning or good afternoon. How are you today? Okay. Well, why don't we go ahead and jump in? And if a few other folks come in late, that's great. So first off, just wanted to welcome everybody. Thank you for joining the session. My name is Jill Montera, and I know I haven't had a chance to work with all of you, but I'm really excited about this focus for our company. I am one of the original employees and founders of AltVS. I've been there just over 13 years now. So I've worn virtually every hat inside of the company and helped it to grow to where we are today. And so at this point, my title and responsibilities include a lot of just different special projects, including this one on ESG. And so our board came to me, I guess probably this summer, and asked, could I do research on this space and help figure out and make some recommendations of how we could help you all as clients figure some of this out as well. So certainly from our product perspective, but also just on a broader level. And so I spent some time doing some research. I also talked to a number of our clients to just understand where they were in the ESG evolution. And so excited to start these roundtables. I hope that these are one of many things that we're doing in this space. But more than anything, I know for some people it feels more like a box checking exercise. But for me, I fundamentally believe that the firms and companies that really embrace this are going to outperform those that are not. And so I think there's just tremendous opportunity. And really the point of these roundtables is just for us to start sharing where each of us are in that evolution. So to get started, if everybody's okay, would love for you to do a quick introduction. So your name, let us know your firm name, your location, what role you're in, and why you're interested or why you decided to sign up for this session. So Scott, you want to lead us off?
Sure. My name is Scott Sadler. I'm working for two companies. I've been working with my own firm, Boardwalk Capital, for 11 years, and we've been an ESG-focused firm all that time. But I'm also working with a company called Altera Investments, and we're in Atlanta. And for them, I've taken on the role of being their director of impact strategies to try to help them create private investments in the impact space. So that essentially is why we're interested. We're trying to make impact more of a core business as opposed to an ancillary business for us. And we're also trying to make and set into place strategies and policies that put ESG at the center of the firm. So there's the firm side, and then there's the investment side.
Great. Well, that's awesome, Scott. Yeah, you guys are on the forward edge of this. So excited to hear some of your anecdotes and war stories of what you've learned along the way.
It's still very early for us. So yeah, I'll do my best.
Okay, great. Super. How about for you, Jacqueline?
Yeah, my name is Jacqueline Steen. I'm currently working at a firm called Redesign Health, which is based in New York. I'm very new to this firm, so I'm about a month into my role at Redesign Health, but prior had spent 9 years at Third Point, which is a hedge fund in New York. And I've spent the majority of my career in investor relations. So currently I'm a principal at Third Point. I was a director of investor relations. And why I'm interested is to kind of just keep a finger to the pulse of what's going on in the industry. Of course, investors are increasingly asking to understand what different firms are doing from an ESG standpoint on both the investing and corporate side. So one of my jobs is to start to document what we're doing at Redesign into more of a formal policy. And excited to be here with all of you.
Good. Super. Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm sure in the IR role, you're getting a lot of those questions. And so I think that's honestly a big reason why so many people are having to do something, because the investors are really demanding it. So excited to hear more about that. How about for you, Lee?
Sure. Hi, I'm Lee Evangelakos. I work at American Industrial Partners. So we're focused on investing in industrial companies, PE firm and focused on investing in industrial companies. I think we're pretty early on in our ESG journey. We are, obviously working with a lot of companies that are doing like pretty sometimes dirty manufacturing in America and in Europe and Australia. So trying to figure out the right way to like govern companies within the bounds of the reality of what they do, but also kind of trying to emphasize ESG and tracking the right metrics and getting the right things kind of front and center for our boards and things like that. So we're just starting to kind of organize around it at the firm level at this point.
Yeah, heavy emphasis on the E, I suppose.
Yes, and we're pretty good at a lot of safety stuff. That's one thing that we've been really good at historically, and kind of trying to expand some of the practices.
Good. Yeah, which I think, do you consider that the safety stuff to fall underneath the S with the social side?
Yes,
or,
yeah,
great.
that's how we think about it.
Okay, super. Well, yeah, thanks. Great. Yeah, that's going to be an interesting conversation with each of you having very different vantage points. So, so excited to jump right in. So yeah, in general today, just 3 requests I want to add as we get started: transparency, vulnerability, and confidentiality. I think one thing I learned as I talked with everybody is that everybody's trying to figure this out. Everybody's a little sheepish about saying, we don't have this figured out, or I have no idea what I'm doing here, kind of thing. But I found that, the more we start to talk to people, everybody's in some stage of that evolution and taking steps. And I think that's really the key, just after talking to clients. And I talked to plenty of it here in the United States, as well as some over in Europe. And of course, I do feel like the Europeans are ahead of us. They would prescribe somewhere between 2 to 5 years. I'm not sure, if it's quite that long, but I think we really are trying to close the gap there and try to understand, okay, how do we want to incorporate this into how we run our businesses? So anyway, so I just encourage all 3 of these pieces as we talk about the different topics over the next hour. So to start, I'm going to lead you through the summary of the survey we sent. So when you signed up the session, we requested that people give us an idea of where things stand. So I'll give you the high-level overview of how the survey responses came in, and then I'll dive into some of the research that I did. So the research I did for our board, and I'm going to focus really on some of the frameworks, tools, and standards that are out there. So hopefully a good chance for us to all talk about some of the things that I'm seeing. And what I really tried to do is just pick out the ones that I was hearing about most often. And so I'll highlight each of those. And then I've got a couple questions for us to talk about as a group. But again, because we're small, feel free to interrupt, ask questions along the way, or interject whenever you can. Okay, so from a summary perspective, I'll start off with, the question was, how would you rate your firm's adoption? So 15%, I'd say, are doing it really well. So that's a group in the blue. We've got a strategy, we're executing against it, and it's fairly sophisticated. The next group is 15% also, which is the yellow group. And that's the folks who say, yeah, we've got some priorities and we're starting to make progress, but it's not yet a comprehensive, sophisticated strategy. And then the biggest group, which you can see the combination of the red and the green, 54% haven't even started or just in the very early discussions. We've had 2 of these roundtables so far, and I've heard a lot of people say like, oh, we've just created a policy, or we've just hired a firm to help us create a policy. So know that that's also very typical. So I don't know, for the 3 of you, where would you put yourself if you had to pick one of these slices of the pie?
Well, Jill, I got a chuckle when you said, or they've hired a firm to help them.
Yeah.
Because Altera helped a company raise a little capital that's in the space of helping people do ESG strategies and policies. So, well, we help them because we have some skin in the game, and we hired them rather because we have some skin in the game. Yeah. But so far they've led us down the very early stages. And what I found interesting is, in contrast to, like, say, B Corp certification, it's a totally different process. And so it's helpful. I'll give them credit for that. Okay, and it's proof of impact is the name of the firm. So
proof of impact. Okay, I'll take a look at that. That's helpful. Thanks, Scott, for sharing that. And are they based in Atlanta, or do you know where they're based?
No, they're split between San Francisco and some European cities, I think, in maybe. Okay. Yeah, I can't remember exactly. Some of the principals are from Europe.
Okay, great. I'll take a peek at that one. Okay. How about for you, Jacqueline? Where would you rate or grade yourself?
Yeah, so Redesigned Health, just to give you a little bit of context, is a company that essentially helps start other healthcare focused companies that we've identified are white areas within healthcare space, and we believe we have a solution that will hopefully address those. So it could be insurance fraud. It could also be the fact that there hasn't been a lot of innovation within physical therapy, as an example. So the company itself obviously has a very strong social component, given our mission-oriented approach to investing, but we have not formalized a policy whatsoever. So I would say they're definitely in the camp of haven't started it, but have a lot of good material to use so far.
Okay, great, super. And Lee, how about for you for AIP?
I actually would put us in the yellow. We have a policy. I think we're kind of in iteration 2 of like, okay, how do we really change that policy to something that means something more to us and make sure we're tracking the right things. But we are like making progress, and I don't know. When given these options, that's the best one, I think.
Okay, great. No, it's helpful to hear. So the second question we talked about is which topics were most interesting: policies, practices, and metrics. And I'd say for the most part, people chose all three, but if they just chose one, it was always metrics. And I like to think about this one, this is again, some of the findings that I had. I think of these as really a three-legged stool. And so I think it's natural for people to start on the policy side, right? Sometimes though, the policy is either somebody else created it or we ripped it off one of our competitors' websites and we've repurposed a few words and then we've called it our own. The thing I haven't seen a whole lot of, or what people tend to have a tendency to do, is skip totally by number 2 and jump right to metrics, which I think is an interesting practice of like, why are we measuring something if we have not put any changes in practice? And I think, the obvious reason is practices are really hard. This is where you have to start to come up with the program. Somebody needs to own it. And, I think we've talked to a lot of people who have said it's sort of everybody's and nobody's responsibility. And so we're all at the firm trying to juggle how we balance this. So, I think it's an interesting piece, and we'll talk about this later, but I think there is that tendency of like, let's just start tracking it because the investors are demanding it. But why would we expect the metrics to ever improve if we've never made any changes internally or externally into how we run ourselves or how we help our operating companies? So any thoughts about those three topics?
Jill, I can't argue with your logic there.
Okay. Yeah, I always use the idea of health. It's like, well, I could set a policy that I want to be healthier. I could eat well and exercise. I could start measuring myself on the scale, but if I never eat better or exercise, why bother? So I think it's a constant evolution. And I think the thing I've heard the most from clients as I talk to folks is sometimes with the practices, it is daunting because it's so large. But, I'd encourage you, even if it's just one or two things, do a couple things really well and just start moving. And I do think that the practices build momentum. And from the clients that I've talked to, especially in Europe, that are really executing on all cylinders in this regard, they are making great forward progress just by start small and build off of that momentum. Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, you saw me inhaling. You're good. It's funny, as we were looking through this, one of the challenges is we've created a lot of funds that have nothing to do with impact, and we've never asked those GPs to meet this new standard.
Sure.
And so what we didn't want to do was look backward and create work where it wasn't necessary. And really just to say there's a line, we're drawing a line in time, and as we move forward, we're going to incorporate this into our sort of due diligence, and we're going to engage, and we're going to try to use our influence to shape entities that maybe are not impact oriented.
Sure.
But for instance, a real estate project that we may lobby the GP to do solar, a canopy or a rooftop or what have you. Great. Tiny little something, but we can work with them without undermining what they do every day.
Sure. Love to hear your thoughts on, sometimes I think about this as the concentric circles. So do you first focus on your firm and how you run internally and make sure that you're incorporating these principles? And then do you extend that to your operating companies? And then do you extend it to the operating companies' clients per se? Or do you think you could you start on that second rung? Or does that sort of end up not sounding as authentic or genuine if you as a firm aren't running yourself with these principles in mind?
I think from my perspective, it's pretty clear that it's hypocritical to ask something that you're not willing to do for yourself, especially when you have a firm that's the size of ours, which is 12 people, right? And we think about when we invest in either a venture or fund or a private equity fund, growth equity, what have you. I mean, then they have 20 different portfolio companies that then they're not going to be able to lean on them just because we we did something. So we surely better do it ourselves. The work is much heavier lifting at their level than ours, and we need to respect that. So
no, absolutely. Jacqueline or Lee, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, actually, we in many cases have been learning from some of our portfolio companies. So they, we'll have a company that for whatever reason has evolved, stronger ESG practices than the rest of the portfolio, or maybe than us. And it's actually been a really great, now that we have kind of like a more formal center of excellence at our firm, to kind of work with the companies on what they're doing, what their struggles are, and we're trying to use some of that to inform, as we standardize this, what this looks like across the portfolio. And it is, I think that what we're kind of like, the program that we're creating for the portfolio is different than what we're talking about internally, just because we're so much smaller. The impacts that we have are really different. So we're trying to kind of like work in parallel and make sure, we're not being, Scott, as you said, hypocritical, but it's not like, we need to think as much about our, like our manufacturing, electricity usage and stuff like that. So it's kind of like hard to balance the two. And in some cases, easier to start with the portfolio where it's really like the low hanging fruit is a little bit more obvious. So.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Certainly in the industrial space. Yeah, that's a great point. Jacqueline, anything to add?
Yeah, I think we just have a slightly different perspective and maybe like a unique ability to incorporate ESG very early on in our operating companies because of the way that we go about our business. Because we launched companies basically from the beginning, and we help bring in the founding teams of these companies. If we could come up with a policy that we internally have and then express the importance of having an ESG mindset as these companies grow, it's an ability to really have that seed planted very early on relative to perhaps some of the other more mature operating companies that are having to think about this involvement now that they've spent years to decades developing their business in a different way. So I think it's a very unique opportunity that we have at Redesign Health.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. The next question we asked in the survey was just what questions do you have related to ESG? And you can see there was a lot around data collection and tracking, as well as the metrics piece. As well as then how do we incorporate it into, doing due diligence on these companies and evaluating what to invest into. Certainly policies is a biggie, and then certifications as the last sort of high level topic. So lots of good questions. Like I said, I think everybody's trying to figure it out as we're going along. And then the last question was just really, what would you like to get out of it? And so, I think more than anything, it really is about the learning. And so we'll definitely talk about that today, but also when we wrap up, would love to get some thoughts from each of you of like, okay, how can we make these sessions more helpful? I've had a lot of good feedback so far, including, having somebody who's already gone through the whole process. Could they come in and just do sort of a learning session where they talk about how they have evolved, how they went through that process, what they learned along the way. Also potentially a chance where you all could get together in small groups to say, I'd like to raise my hand. Here's the problem I'm trying to solve for. Could we all brainstorm on what each of us have done and related to that problem? So I think, think about that as we go through, but would love to hear from you of how we can make these more helpful.
Jill, I have a quick question. Do you expect these groups to sort of say as a little group that maintains the relationship?
Probably not, Scott, just because of the difficulty with logistics, but happy to share. I'll send you all an email after the fact, so you will have each other's contact information if you'd like to reach out. But yeah, I think we'll try to figure out that right balance, because it's not probably 100 people on a call, but it's likely more than just a handful of us. And so how do we find that right balance where you all are able to share? And at some point we'll all get back together again and maybe do some of this in person, which would be great too.
Wow, imagine that.
That's right. So the next piece I'll go into is just a bit of the research summary. So I'm going to start down on the frameworks. And as I mentioned, after talking to a lot of clients and doing research and looking into each of these were really probably the ones that rose to the top. These are the tools and frameworks and standards that I heard about most often. So I'm going to start over on the left side with the framework. So UNPRI, the UN SDGs, as well as ILPA. Are any of you signatories for some of those, or do you follow some of the principles in those?
Not yet signatories, yes, following the principles from PRI.
From PRI. Okay, good. Lee or Jacqueline, anything for you guys?
We've looked at them. We're also not signatories at this point, although
Okay.
a couple portfolio companies are trying to align themselves to the UNSDG goals and kind of become
Okay, good.
signatories there.
Interesting. Yeah, so I think UNPRI, I'd say that they are definitely the biggie in the industry. So, certainly a national perspective, I believe over 7,000 signatories. We have a lot of our clients who are UNPRI signatories. To me, I think UNPRI sets out a good strategy and a high-level overview. I'd say it's a little bit less actionable per se, with like actual tools and things that folks can use. And I'll relate that back to ILPA, which is much smaller. I think now just like 180 or 200 signatories, primarily US based. But what I like about ILPA, and I'll share this with you after the call, is ILPA has a very specific framework for both ESG as well as DEI, with very specific actionable things that you can do in terms of starting to implement. So they give you standards, they give you templates, they give you just things that you can leverage to speed up the process as you're trying to roll out a strategy internally. So I like ILPA in that way. And like I said, I'll share that information with all of you. The SDGs, I think, are interesting. As you all know, kind of very high level with clean water and access to food. I am hearing from some of our clients, though, from a fundraising IR perspective, Jacqueline, people are starting to put the SDG icons in their fundraising collateral. So I don't know if it's making its way into the PPMs per se, but more of the fundraising decks that you're sharing, they are absolutely trying to highlight that and relate the investments back to those SDGs.
That's interesting.
So yeah, I think more to come on that. But like I said, I will definitely share more on the ILPA side, some of the research that I've put together there. I think the other piece that I'm hearing a lot about, and I'd like to hear from you guys on this, is that when people don't know necessarily where to start and what to do, I have a sense that people are focusing on DEI first from an S perspective. If it's hard to know where to start, or maybe your portfolio companies are all over from an industry perspective, at least starting on diversity and inclusion is one place to start and one place to easily track those metrics, regardless of portfolio company. So curious if any of you, the three of you, are you starting to do this, or are you doing this, or investors asking for it?
I don't want to hog this call by being the first one to answer, but I'll just say that we've had one initial meeting with our consultants, and the easiest thing for us to track has to do with HR, right? Because that's already in a data system, and the company's focused on data, not unlike you guys, right? So that's easy enough for me to see and for us to implement, but that's internal, right? That's mostly looking at our own work. So, and that's really a very light lift, right? That's probably an hour's worth of programming, So for portfolio companies, I think it's similar, right? I think it is the easiest thing to track is your HR. From there, I think it's industry by industry, and now we're talking about different languages and much more difficult thing to accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, on that point, we actually, we've heard the same thing from our, this is kind of like in America, what people are talking about. I think one thing we thought it would be easy, one of the easier pieces to grab data on, and we've seen when you go internationally, because of some of the privacy stuff in Europe, so actually it's been harder for companies to give us back information on that than we thought it would be.
Interesting.
And so we're kind of actually not sure what to do there as much, maybe just limit reporting to America or figure it out somehow. So I don't know.
Interesting. And are you looking at both, from the board perspective for each of the operating companies, as well as how they run internally, or primarily just internal?
We're mostly looking at just employees, not board level.
Yeah. Well, I think it shines a light. I mean, obviously in private equity, it's a pretty homogenous group of people. And so it absolutely, if you start tracking DEI metrics for your portfolio companies, you have to be very thoughtful about it as a GP as well, because we just don't have a lot of diversity in that space. And it would be great to make inroads in that regard. I know for a couple of the clients that I talked to, they were doing some interesting work with DEI and hiring students right out of undergrad or graduate school with a more diverse backgrounds. And then they were allowing each firm and each operating company to nominate what they saw as up and coming leaders. And those up and coming leaders were getting exposure back to the GP with almost like a leadership roundtable that they were doing over the course of a year or two. But I thought it was a pretty cool way of like, not just checking the box to say, we're looking to hire more employees that are diverse, but then actually staying true to it and then doing more development from a professional growth perspective. So kind of a cool story.
Yeah, this might be one of those things where we really do learn from one another when we start sharing what portfolio companies have done, because one of the companies that we're close to did a scholarship program as a way to recruit, college students who would become interns, who would then become hopefully full-time. And that's a lot of steps to get a full-time employee, but for maybe $20,000 in scholarships, they got to look at hundreds of applicants while they're still, seniors and juniors in college. And it was very effective for them in terms of having that, that large pool to choose from.
I love that. Yeah, great idea. Great idea. Switching gears just a little bit on the standards perspective, the biggie out there, which I don't know how much each of you have gone into, is definitely SASB. Are each of you familiar with that?
Yes.
Okay. Somewhat. Lee, Jacqueline, how about for you? Anything?
Yeah, so I can't really talk about redesign because I'm very, very new to this company, but I'll tell you from like Third Point's perspective, just to give you a benchmark, they were signatories to the UNPRI.
Okay.
I would say, we had at Third Point a very large institutional base, and for sure, US-based investors were very focused on D&I. We would get a lot of questionnaires on both like our corporate as well as our portfolio D&I metrics. And but I would say the more challenging part for Third Point was the fact that most of our non-US investors were very, very focused on the E component. So we were prioritizing having some metrics that we could share on the E front with investors, because they were increasingly looking to look through our portfolio to capture their entire like footprint in the E.
Okay. Yeah, I think, from a SASB perspective with that, I mean, what I like about SASB is it's incredibly comprehensive, right? And they're coming from a foundation of accounting principles. So of course, all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. They go through basically 77 different industries and say, if you're in this industry, these are the metrics that you ought to be taking or paying attention to. And then they go even a step further to say, if this is the metric, this is exactly how you define it. So that, Lee, if you were comparing yourself against another industrial company or manufacturing company, you could say where you perform. So it is a taxonomy, and it goes through incredible depth. I'd say the difficulty with SASB is if you're just getting started, it's like, I'm just trying to learn how to walk or ride a bike, and suddenly I'm given like a really fancy fast car. So it might be more than most people need. I think it's a great reference point and something to aspire to and look towards, but it is a lot to bite off initially from my perspective. The other one is TCFD, and that one's probably most applicable. I'd say most of our European clients are following the TCFD standards. The one thing I will say, and I'd be curiously if you're hearing this, but I've had a few clients in the impact space say that they are anticipating the SEC to start requiring climate disclosures here in the next months to year. Have you heard anything about that, or are you working towards any of that?
I think we've heard like this could potentially come, but nothing more kind of.
Okay, along with higher taxes on carried interest and other things that are making people nervous. So yeah, I think TCFD, again, if you operate in that space, I think it is a great tool. Again, probably very much so used in Europe, but still a great tool and a reference point. And then the last things I'll focus on are the tools. And I'm sure you guys are getting the same kind of advertisements and whatnot, emails that I'm getting, but I really distilled it down to 3 that I thought are operating well in this space. Preqin, obviously a pretty natural one, just given that so many of our clients are already using it. They have a relatively new ESG tool that's come out just in the last, let's say, 6 to 9 months. And what I like about the Preqin tool is that they have tried to take the best of UNPRI, SASB, and they basically distilled it down to, I believe, 37, and ILPA distilled it down to 37 key metrics that they say you can apply these to all of your operating companies. So again, if you're wanting like a subset of the metrics, I think Preqin has a pretty good tool. And so what they do is they grade on those factors at the firm or GP level, at the fund level, as well as at the portfolio company level. So it's an interesting starting point. We've recently just created a Preqin integration where the data is flowing from Preqin into our products. And so we are in initial discussions with their product team about potentially expanding that to include ESG related metrics for that data feed that's flowing in.
Sorry, just to understand,
Go ahead.
I'm not very familiar with any of the things in the tool section. This is going to be something where the company is submitting data and then it's aggregate, it's doing some benchmarking for you and then aggregating it across all of the operating companies. Is that the right way to understand that?
Yeah, and so Preqin has a research team, so they claim that they are going to be going out and basically assessing or grading these companies. How they then share them with the company, how they've graded them, and then maybe ask for feedback from the company to maybe refute how they've been graded. I mean, that'll be an interesting one to grade. I think at a higher level, certainly on the firm level, they are looking, or even the fund level, they're looking at some basic things around policies and the makeup of the team at the fund or at the firm, those kinds of things to then assess some sort of grade.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
So just to clarify, Jill, because what you described sounds like something as vast as a phone book, right?
Yeah.
All of the portfolio companies in all of the private equity, venture capital, private credit, real estate firms that are on Preqin, they're doing essentially a physical and going in and you can't imagine, I can't imagine, not you, I can't imagine the magnitude of that project.
Agreed.
So if one is subscribing, you've got to wonder what level of content is actually available at this stage and what percentage of the funds they're actually doing this review on, because it sounds massive.
I imagine, I would agree, Scott. I mean, they've got to be scraping a lot of just the basic data off of the company's website, perhaps more so than really an in-depth analysis. Mm-hmm. But I would agree with you. I mean, could it be a place, if you're doing due diligence on an operating company, as a place to start? Potentially. Is it an end all be all? No, I don't think so.
No, it sure sounds like a good tool to have at your disposal, and not a cheap one at that. But
right. Yeah. No, absolutely. I think the others that who knows we'll start to see is like, will the eye levels with IHS start to do more research in this space as well? I think they're already doing some of that work now. So it'll be interesting, but obviously, then it's also you requesting from your operating companies the metrics that you're trying to track, and then how do you analyze that? And first request it, right? How do you include that with the financial metrics that you're already asking, and then have an overlay of the ESG metrics that you're asking on a quarterly basis? So the second tool I'll highlight is just the MSCI. And so they are basically just grading, and you're probably familiar with that one. They are just grading funds, but they are trying to then incorporate more ESG into their fund rating. So probably geared more towards the folks that are in the LP space, where if they're trying to hit certain criteria from an ESG perspective, they might use MSCI as they're doing research to see, okay, which funds fit the criteria that we're interested in, and then leveraging a tool like that. And then the last one is Dun & Bradstreet. That's also a fairly new ESG tool, but they are basically giving an ESG risk rating, and they grade both, I think it's 3 million privately held and 6,000 publicly held companies. And they are giving some sort of ESG ranking or rating based on that. So again, I think it's early to say. I'm keeping an eye out on all of these pieces, but I think these might be tools people start to use. Again, we are trying to look at some of the integrations as well to see if we can make it a little easier lift for all of you to start to pull some of this data into our technology stack.
I think the Dun & Bradstreet thing is fascinating because private companies have been submitting financial information to Dun & Bradstreet for years, right? Yeah. And now they're repurposing that for ESG. And that actually doesn't sound like as hard a lift as the Preqin problem. So that's actually fantastic to learn. I had no idea.
Yeah, it's a fairly new tool out there. So how about it for any of you guys? Are there any other technologies or standards that you're prescribing to or following?
it's too early for us, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. Any others, Jacqueline or Lee?
Oh, I think we want some help, but we don't
Yeah.
have something yet.
Yeah. Makes sense.
We're using iLevel for any reporting we do.
Okay. Good.
Yeah, we don't have anything right now.
Nothing yet. Okay. So I'd say I'm just going to finish up the research piece with sort of three key trends that I presented to our board. So the first is investors want change. And so we talked about this a little earlier. I loved the quote that I can't remember one of our clients said, but you have to move from well-meaning to well-doing. And so many folks are stuck on the well-meaning. They set a policy, their intentions are there, but nothing ever changes. And so I think, everything I'm reading is that the investors are going beyond just starting to say, this is important to us. They're asking for a lot of the data, and we really want folks to move beyond just the greenwashing. So I'd say in general, quantitative data is absolutely going to be important. And I think over time, we'll see that increasingly more important. But I'd say don't shy away from the qualitative either. I think sometimes when the investors hear the anecdotes of some of the cool things that people are putting into place, that's equally as inspiring, even though it may not be a metric that you can track across every single operating company. The second piece is just the multifaceted nature of the strategy. Like I said, think of it as a three-legged stool, and you need all three stools operating in order for it to balance. I encourage you to move away or move off of the policy piece sooner than later and start to be thinking about the practices and the metrics. And then the last piece, like I said, is just that there are a number of firms, there are new firms popping up every day who are working in this space. So I am working to try to keep on top of that. I'm listening in on webinars on a weekly basis, but the good news is that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think there are lots of people out there who can help all of us as we go down this journey together.
Joe, what can you say about the demographics of the respondents to your survey?
Good question, Scott. I don't know if I have the full metrics. I think the overall responses were maybe in the number of like 20-ish.
Okay.
Yeah. But like in terms of the research I did was, much more broad reaching.
Okay. And the reason I ask this is because, we're based in the Southeast.
Yeah.
We are way ahead of most of our LPs, right?
Yeah.
We are Europe compared to our clients in the US,
Yeah.
right? And by the way, I think the Europeans are 15 years ahead of us, just my own.
Yeah. Okay. 15, wow.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if the investors want change thing is a subset of investors, and a typical wealthy investor is different from a family office, which is different from an institutional investor.
Sure.
And we're trying to be in front of it.
Yeah. Are your investors all geographically based as well, Scott?
Largely, yes.
Okay. Jacqueline, how about for you? What kinds of things, or what's the makeup for redesign? Is it mostly institutionals or endowments?
It is a strong component of high net worth family office and some institutions, more on the ENF side. I'd say, again, I can only share more about Third Point, and I would agree with you, Scott, that the push and pull that we got from institutional LPs from Europe were like light years ahead of what we were getting from US institutions, which were really more focused on the information gathering rather than the push to actually report back metrics and have some sort of standard to apply to your portfolio. So we definitely saw that, at least at Third Point, that like you noted, Scott, Europe is light years ahead, and to be frank, US managers were struggling to keep up because we were behind in terms of what we were looking to implement and also what we were able to provide from a portfolio perspective.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And I think, I can speak from just our clients who are on the LP side. At this point, like when they've had us make some changes to their system, it's oftentimes a really simple checkbox, like do they have an ESG strategy? Check. It's very simple information that they're tracking at this point, but I do absolutely believe that it's shifting in this way. And I think, for some of the investors, I think about some of the large university endowments, it's not just that the universities are being driven because their constituents are demanding it. So when the students at Harvard are demanding that we're not investing into fossil fuels and firearms, the university at some point has to make some changes there. So it's been interesting to watch more of a grassroots effort in this regard. So, I think the other piece too, Scott, from what I've read is, I think there was for a long time, people would say, oh, impact investing, ESG, we'll take a concessionary return, but we'll feel good that we're making an impact.
Yeah.
From the research that I read, it appears within like the last 2 years, the lines have crossed and the ESG funds are actually outperforming in the market versus funds that are not taking these things. And that's just simply because I do think the world around us has changed. I think people, employees want to work at companies that are thinking about these principles. Consumers want to buy from companies that are considering these principles. And I think in general, we will see a more of a tidal wave towards this. But I do think, and I don't know, Lee, I'd be curious. I know you've got probably a different perspective on that, just given, hardcore industrials, it's less of a consumer product per se, right out of the gate. But what are your thoughts on that, and what are your investors and constituents wanting?
No, yeah, I think we're seeing it from investors, and we're also seeing it from some of the end. I mean, it's a little different, companies that do have a commercial end user definitely fearing it, but even, companies where I think companies are feeling pressure based on their customers for some kind of supply chain transparency and some of these practices as well. So
yeah,
it's definitely from all sides.
Yeah. And more diversity in their supply chain, or just more efficiency and environmental practices in the supply chain?
I personally haven't seen the ask for more diversity yet. More just, transparency, kind of understanding of what kind of practices you're supporting.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's interesting. Well, we're going to move towards more, continued group discussion, but let's focus more on that second question, because I think we've highlighted some of the first, but is there anything that you've tried from an ESG perspective that's worked particularly well for your organization, or conversely, that has absolutely bombed and not worked at all, and you're moving away from that? So any anecdotes people can share?
It's just too early for us, Jill. Sorry.
Okay, that's all right. That's all right, Scott. Lee or Jacqueline, anything that you have to share on that?
I think it's definitely too early on redesign's front as well.
Okay.
I think one thing I'd say is we've tried a pretty centralized approach, and we've realized we really need to get the whole firm bought in and working with their companies. It needs to be everybody, not just kind of a committee of a couple people doing it.
Interesting.
Lee, you make a really good point, and I want to just make a quick comment, is that we've done one meeting and we brought people in from different sides of the firm. And what I was really just pleasantly surprised at, what across the board buy-in we had on this is the right direction for the firm. I recruited these people just because that person's in HR and that person's on the sales side and that person, not because they were advocates for anything in particular. And it made me feel really good that this is now a pervasive opinion. I just came back from a meeting with a brand new client that's enacting a whole lot of new policies to recruit new employees, and they're all about ESG, B Corp certification, all this stuff. They recognize this is the language that younger workers are speaking, and if you're not speaking it back, you don't know that language, they're not going to work for you, or you're going to have to, you're going to be an outlier and you're going to have to bribe people to work for you. I'm seriously, you couldn't tell them you're working for less because you like the company. You can never say that to them, but you can say to the management team, you either come along or you're going to have to pay people more. And so I've just in the last couple of days seen this happening in real time. And this is a chemical company, Like, wow, worlds are colliding here,
Yeah, the B Corp is an interesting one. We've actually been B Corp certified, I think, for going on maybe 10 years now, but I think that's an interesting piece. You guys are partway through the process, Scott?
No, we're on our third recertification.
Okay, great, super.
Yeah, and that's awesome. Boardwalk Capital. That's my firm.
Okay, that's Boardwalk, okay.
Yeah, Altera probably will not be a B Corp anytime soon.
Okay, great.
And I was going to use the B Corp certification process just as the template until we hired.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's a great template. And I think that's another group to watch in terms of the metrics, Jen and Gears and whatnot. They are certainly putting out some interesting frameworks and
absolutely
taxonomies for how to track that track that work on the impact space. I'll share, like I said, let me just pop up on my screen for a minute. I'll share this ILPA piece as well in case, and I'll send it to you all afterwards too. But I liked the ILPA framework for just ideas. All right, let me share my screen again. So what I tried to do is just synthesize down for ILPA their roadmap. And so, you know, this is how, these are the major buckets that ILPA's thinking about it in terms of both for D&I as well as ESG, you know, so they are looking at the policy. These are things of like things to do around promoting, attracting and promoting diverse talent. And so again, within each of these, and I've got it linked at the top, like they give you actual tools of what things can you do to start to remove bias from the hiring process. So tips and tools and practices that I think are really helpful. But it gives, I thought it was a really nice set of very tangible resources that folks can use. And like I said, even if you just start to pick one or two of these bullet points, what things can you be doing? And again, this is the D&I side, and then this is the ESG side. So it always starts with the policy piece, but you know, certainly the due diligence and how folks are looking at investments. And there are certainly, I know a lot of companies out there helping firms do the due diligence and grading from an ESG perspective. There are also a lot of audit firms out there from an ESG perspective that I've read about. So once, you know, folks say these are our metrics, people are going back in and validating that that's actually true. But again, I'll send this over to you all. I'll send you the slides from today as well. And if those are helpful, or as you go down this this journey, if you want to talk or you're interested in hearing more of some of the anecdotes that I've heard from our clients, I'm more than happy to share, you know, things that I've heard along the way or be a resource in any way. And certainly with our products, hopefully here to come as well.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So I guess just to finish up, would be curious, you know, as you think about what would be helpful going forward. And like I said, I want to try to do these at least once a quarter, but perhaps even more often, just as we have things that would be valuable. What things would be helpful to you as we start to gather more of these roundtables?
You know, I have to say, first of all, and I'm so sorry for always jumping in first. I feel like this is not right, but you know, I'm in the thick of this right this second, and I want to just compliment you, Jill, on just how valuable this is.
Well, thanks,
this is not the norm. To have a productive roundtable, right? Usually it's a bunch of people pontificating, and you'll go, well, yeah, you were pontificating, Scott. I hope not. I hope not. I mean, this is very practical and helpful. And so I look at this and say, how could the next, you know, engagement be this helpful? And I think it would be about drilling down onto any of these specifics, you know, because this is such a great template right here. I was on the tip of my tongue. Are you able to share these with us, or would you be violating some sort of you know, relationship that you have with ILPA, right? Because you might say, yeah, you could look at this, Scott, but I can't send it to you because it's theirs. And so this is going to be very helpful to us. And you know, I just think we'll ultimately, as we move forward a month or two from now, we'll go, now we know where we need help. At this point, I don't even know where we need help because it's so early, but I can tell from this where the help's going to need to be. It's some of these bullet points.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like I said, yeah, this actually is interesting because ILPA puts all of this information out on their website. I just tried to organize it in a way that was a little bit more graphic so I could look at some of those key buckets and say, okay, what does all this mean? But yeah, the website is incredibly helpful, and you can start to see that, you know, linked here where, you know, just as an example, you can start to get into, okay, when we talk about due diligence, you know, how would you do these? Like, how do you incorporate, you know, into your due diligence questionnaire? And then they give you some examples. And again, then they leverage the tools that are out there, like from UNPRI. So again, I just tried to take a lot of their text and put it and present it in a way that looked slightly different. So
thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. But we'll send that over. How about for you, Jacqueline or Lee? Any things that you think would be helpful for future sessions?
Yeah, I like the idea that was brought up, I think, earlier on in the presentation where you said, oh, is there somebody who's gone through this process that can kind of give you an overview of how they went about implementing and perhaps pointing out areas that were particularly troublesome for them, or vice versa, what were the easy wins? Because I think for a lot of people, the hardest part is starting, because there's so much research. You could really start to like drill down into one area and then realize you're completely blind to another area that you should be thinking about. So having somebody who has some experience would be super helpful from my perspective, just to hear them go through, what they were able to kind of implement and the pitfalls that they came across.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that's great. That's definitely, I've got a couple clients in mind that I think would be happy to do that. So happy to do that. How about for you, Lee? Any other ideas?
No, I want to echo, I think kind of the practical, like the kind of practicalness and really like example-based presentation has been really helpful, and definitely raised a couple new things to go research and learn about. So thank you.
Okay,
I also think kind of like maybe sessions focused on type of player in the ecosystem, or, like it would be great for us to be in a group with other more industrial focused types of people, or even LPs who are looking at firms like that. I just think that would be a helpful perspective, but this has been super helpful.
Yeah, no, I think absolutely. And I think they're, kind of bouncing back and forth, sometimes being just with your peers, and then other times hearing from people that are, like in the healthcare space, because totally different ideas could come up. So, all right, well, I'll send a follow-up email here shortly. Would love to hear back from you. And like I said, if I can be a resource, I do feel, like I said, very strongly about this, excited about what the potential could be across really the globe. I mean, I think the tremendous impact, very inspiring, and would love to be a help in any way that I can. So please reach out and let me know what I can do to help.
Thank you, Jill. Careful what you wish for, though.
That's all right. That's all right.
Thanks so much,
I love
Jill.
working.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate
Thank
the
you.
time.
Really appreciate it.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.